have a very scary story to tell you. I was out of work and was desperate for cash when I looked on Craigslist under gigs a few years back. I responded to several ads, ranging from painting to helping people move and cleaning. On a Sunday morning, somebody called me and told me they had some work. They said the job was to clean a kitchen inside a small building that was recently closed down, and he was renovating it. He needed me to show up and work in the evening, starting at 7 and ending at like 1 or 2 in the morning, and that it was only for tonight, but he'd pay me cash $200. That sounded great to me, and I had no problem with these hours, as my last job was a graveyard shift anyways. So the man I was talking to gave me the address, and I told him I'd be there on time at 7 o'clock. He sounded like a normal, nice guy. I showed up a little before 7 and approached the building. This building was amongst many others downtown, but looked eerily lonely in the way that it had no windows and no lights were working outside in front of it. I thought it might be a bar that was closed down or something. I knocked on the big wooden door. I heard noise coming from inside, and eventually a man opened up. He was tall. He had a goatee and looked to be in his 50s. He greeted me with a smile and asked me to come on in. There was a single lamp lighting the room we were in, and it indeed looked like an old bar. The room wrapped around another smaller room in the center of it. It looked as if he was painting the walls and working to fix the top of the bar, which was rotting old wood. He showed me to the center room, which was the kitchen. The kitchen was very dirty. Old glasses and dishes were lying around. The oven was pulled from the wall, showing rotting drywall behind it. Sawdust and dirt was all over everything. He told me I was to clean this kitchen and to get as much done as possible before 2 a.m. I told him I'd work my ass off, and he pointed out some cleaning products sitting on the ground by the wall with some rags to scrub with. I asked if he had any gloves, and he said no, but that the sink in the corner still worked, and I could clean my hands when I wanted with that. That sucked, and I was a bit hesitant to clean some of the stuff in here without gloves, but I remembered that $200 he promised, and I moved past my disappointment. He told me while I was cleaning he was going to be working outside at the bar. I asked where I should begin, and he said scrubbing the baseboards around the room. I told him okay, and he walked out. Fast forwarding, I had been cleaning for about 2 hours, making a bit of progress, and I was getting very thirsty. I told myself I would finish this, then that, before exiting the room to ask if there was anything I could drink. I kicked myself for not thinking to bring a water bottle. After finishing my goal, I stood up, and I realized I had not heard him working outside the room at all. I hadn't heard anything, as a matter of fact. I walked to the door and opened it. To darkness. Complete pitch black. At that instant, I became very nervous and shouted out, "Hey man, I'm making some good progress in here," expecting to hear him respond. He didn't. I looked around, but seriously could not see anything. The lamp was gone. I looked back into the kitchen, which was bright and all lit up with all the lights on and working in the ceiling. I peered back out into the dark room. I began taking steps out into the room surrounding the kitchen. After taking about 10 whole steps, I stopped and was about to speak out again when, to my horror, the door slammed shut behind me and I was engulfed in blinding darkness. I could not see anything, and I spun around, waving my arms, walking back toward the kitchen door. My steps were small, as I did not know what was in front of me. I was afraid I would run into something. And I did. Waving my hands around in front of me, I hit something. Not a door. I hit somebody's face. I scuttled backwards, not hearing anything. Whoever I had just touched didn't react. I backed up until I hit the back wall, and I realized I must have been close to the entrance door to the building. I turned, and I felt around for the doorknob. Luck was on my side, as I quickly found it and pulled the door open. It was dark outside at this point, and only a very small amount of moonlight came into the room, just enough to where I could see the man standing against the kitchen door with a blank expression on his face. I ran out the door and never looked back. That's the last time I used Craigslist to find work. What was that guy doing? What was he going to do? It makes me sick to think about it. My sister Sarah walks at night. She often goes outside and walks around the farm. 2 nights ago, I looked outside and saw her walking at a brisk pace, holding Father's hatchet. It wasn't the first time she has butchered our cattle. We might have sent her away if not for the truth. She is asleep when she goes walking at night. Father has been gone for 5 years, and Mother cries most of the time. She cries because of Sarah. It was 1:30 after midnight when I awoke. I know she opened my door as I shut it when I sleep. She often walks around with knives and sharp farm tools. When I walked down the stairs, I saw her. She was sitting in Father's chair, clutching a knife. She was looking at me. I took a single step towards her, and she sprung up to her feet and took 2 paces towards me, and then stopped. I said her name, Sarah, and told her I would take her back to bed. She said to me, "I am not sleeping." I then asked her if she was not asleep, then why is she holding a knife? She spoke, "Because I want to kill you and Mother." I told her she was ill and needed to put the knife back before Mother catches her. She turned around and walked outside. I didn't leave the house that night. When Mother and I found Sarah in the morning, she had stabbed herself in the eye and was dead, face down outside the barn. I'm worried about Mother. She hasn't walked at night since stabbing Father 5 years ago. She says she was asleep when she did it. My mother never sleeps. Driving down Old River Road in California back in 2002, I needed gas. I ended up driving through this town called Isleton. I parked my car at the first building I saw, which I think was an old hotel that looked like it was 150 years old. I looked all around and couldn't see a gas station, but what I did see was a very overweight woman sitting on a porch at a nearby house. It also looked very, very old. I couldn't see her face, but I know she was looking at me the whole time. I looked up at the old hotel windows and saw that somebody was also watching me through one of them. Did you ever see that movie, The House of Wax? Remember the town in that movie? This was just like that. I looked over to another building and saw an old, rusted metal Coca-Cola sign that was swinging back and forth and making a very loud, screeching noise. I suddenly, without any warning, felt sick. I have no idea why, but I needed to throw up right then.
I got out of my truck and fell to my knees on the gravel. As I threw up, I could see to the right of me, someone was approaching me slowly. As soon as I stopped for a second, I heard the person run away. I looked up and just barely caught a glimpse of a man in farm clothes duck behind a building. What the hell is going on here? This grown man was sneaking up on me while I was vulnerable. Unfortunately, I became sick again, and this time, I distinctly heard a woman talking. And in between my heaving, I heard her say, just go, once more. Then, I saw the man again approaching faster. I forced myself to my feet and looked at the man as he closed in. He stopped. He was a very skinny man and looked like he was on meth. His eyes were open super wide and his lips twitched like I had just caught him doing something. All I said was, I'm leaving, and got in my truck. I locked the doors, and after backing up I looked all around the truck. The man was gone, and I never saw the woman. I hit the gas and was out of that town in seconds. It was the smallest, creepiest place I've ever seen, and I will never go back there. The lady that my mother asked to watch my sisters and I was not well. She would arrive at our flat at dark while my mother was gone and watch us until she returned. She would always insist on playing hide and go seek. My sisters and I love this game, but not with the lights off. She would insist that all the lights are off. This night, it was first my turn to find them. I found my sisters first. They were downstairs hiding together under the table. The lady was hiding somewhere upstairs. I was too afraid to go look after the last visit. She came out of the darkness and grabbed me. When I screamed, she put her fingers down my throat. Me and my sisters waited in the library until Mother returned. She was very upset with the lady. She could not find her either. Mother decided that she had gone, but I was afraid she was still here. As I lay in bed, I began to fall asleep. But then I opened my eyes and she was there, standing at the edge of my bed. As I screamed, she put her fingers down my throat and my eyes poured tears. I don't know the name of the town, but it was somewhere in the last 30 miles or so of Interstate 16. If you've ever been on that road, you know that there's maybe 3 exits in the 165 miles that actually have any sort of civilization on them. So we were on a road trip, and one of the girls with us had to go to the bathroom really bad. So we stopped at the next exit, and at the end of the off-ramp was a sign that simply said, gas 1 mile. So we turned that way, and for the entire mile it was just trees, with the occasional single-wide trailer. Then we got to the gas station, which looked like something out of a horror movie. The pumps were old and rusty. There were only 2 of them, and the building was just a tiny gray building. We walked in there, and the floor sagged as you walked. We walked back to where the bathroom was, and it was a single-person bathroom, so the girl went first, and then her boyfriend. When he went, he came out and simply said, "We need to leave." When we got in the car, he told us the entire toilet fell through the floor on one side and got stuck at a 45-degree angle through the floor because the floor was so rotten. At that moment, he looked up, and in the window, There was a man staring into his eyes. We got out of there in a hurry, and we were pretty sure that if we stayed any longer, we would have encountered some very bad people. Again? Again? Those were the words I heard Daddy saying while looking down at one of the chickens. It was completely ripped open. Blood was everywhere. This had been the 4th chicken this week. I was just a boy at the time, but I remember Daddy shouting out that he would gut the beast that was eating our chickens. Daddy unraveled some wire and emptied out some cans of beans. He wired the cans around the perimeter of the coop. The beast would come, and when it hit the wire, the cans would sound. True to his plan, late that night, we heard the sound of the cans falling and clanking. The beast was outside. Daddy took the rifle, threw on his boots, and ran out there to face whatever beast was slaughtering those chickens. I watched from the window as I saw Daddy run out through the field and then stop dead. I ran outside to see what it was. When I approached, I looked at him. His mouth was open, with one lip curled in to create a face of disgust. It was no beast. It was a man. A skin and bones man with long hair and a beard, not wearing clothes. He was hunched over a chicken. He was holding the mutilated bird above his head and letting the blood drain into his mouth. I had never seen something so terrifying, not even 30 years later as I write this. Daddy lifted the rifle and yelled, "You need to leave." I don't know if it was on purpose, but Daddy shot the gun and almost hit the man. The man quickly got up and looked at my daddy. A bloody smile he gave, and then ran away. He never came back, but I wonder, why was he eating the chickens? Maybe some sort of satanic ritual. Maybe he was ill. Or maybe he just liked the taste of blood. The group of friends I had in my 20s really liked to go to the casino a lot. They got me into gambling, and the 5 of us all went every weekend for months. To get to the casino, we took this desolate old dirt road. The drive was about an hour from our hometown. One night on the way back, we passed through this incredibly small town that we always drive through, and for some reason, we thought it would be cool to stop at the bar there and have some drinks. This town was so small, I'm talking 5 buildings maximum, and small old houses tucked behind trees in the back of the buildings. The open sign was lit, and we walked into the bar. There was an old man sitting at the end of the bar, drunk, and a bartender, and that was it. We ordered some beers and sat down at a small metal table in the corner of the room. After some time passed, we were drunk and didn't see any reason to leave. We kept drinking, and somehow, hours later, I found myself walking outside by myself. I started walking down a dark street with the small houses and was struggling to stay on my feet. I was so drunk that I didn't even realize that I was alone, and I was in this dark, creepy, unfamiliar town. I came across this guy standing on a lawn. He was right out of the movies, totally creepy, just standing there watching me as I passed. He stopped me and said something along the lines of, "Had too much?" I began talking with this guy, and all I can remember of our conversation is him describing to me that he wouldn't kill me because I had an A's hat on, and that sometimes he dreams of killing the town's little girls, but wouldn't because Jeff wouldn't think it's right, whoever Jeff is. Even drunk, I knew this guy was off of his meds. I walked away and explored this incredibly dark town before I accidentally stumbled across the bar again. I don't remember much more than that, but the town was called Locke, if I remember correctly, and it gives me the chills when I think of how easily I could have been killed or kidnapped. Nobody in that town seemed normal. My friend and I went to Archer City once, in Texas. It was a long time ago, but we both felt like we weren't welcome while we were there, and everyone gave us dirty looks. Everyone being only a few people. The town was so small, like one main street, and that's it. The sky was gray, and it felt so lonely and hopeless. We went inside a bookstore, only to see the books scattered around the store everywhere. Nobody was working at the counter, and the books were covered in dust. Outside the store, we saw a little boy sitting on a bench, but he never said a word to us, even when we said hello. He was wearing overalls, and he looked like a kid from the 50s. The whole town did, as a matter of fact. Everything looked so dated and old. As we walked, the sidewalk was cracked everywhere. We looked through the windows, but every store was empty. We left pretty quickly. Archer City felt like a town that had once been a nice place to be, but when we visited, it felt forgotten and very creepy. A few years ago, I got lost in rural Missouri. Super lost. Like back county roads lost. I got directions from a gas station where the worker is super pissed that I won't buy his overpriced map. So he gives me directions that includes going down this road to this other road to get to the highway to get to the interstate. So I go down this back road and end up in this town. It's like 2 p.m. and it is completely dead. Not a single person anywhere. Mostly older houses, a run-down downtown area, old post office, that kind of thing. And I'm suddenly filled with dread. Like Stephen King dread. There's trash blowing everywhere, and there's just nobody. I drive by the library, and it's pretty much abandoned. There are oversized books in the window, and they're completely swollen from water. I parked my car and got out at one point. I walked up to the glass and looked inside what looked like an old hotel. I tried opening the door, but it was locked. Through the glass I could see no one, not a single person. After that, I had to get the hell out of there. So I make it out of town, and I keep heading on my way and make it safe to my destination. Later on, I googled the town, and it's insane. The town's history was full of gruesome murders. One woman murdering another pregnant woman to get the baby. A guy terrorizing the entire town, to the point where they all just kill him in the street. The town was Skidmore, Missouri, and it has creeped me out more than any other place on the 3 continents I've been on. It was no joke, terrifying. One dark night, a 15-year-old girl named Lydia was walking home from her friend's house. She turned down a narrow street to take a shortcut and was startled by the sight of an old man standing in her path. When she stopped, the old man turned to her and in a hoarse voice said, "Tell me the way." His face was disgusting, his skin covered in scars and boils, his hair stringy and unkempt, his eyes bulging horribly, almost popping out of their sockets. Lydia was terrified. She was alone in a dark and narrow alleyway with a strange and disturbing person. Her heart began pounding, and it took her a few seconds to catch her breath. "Tell me the way," the old man demanded. Okay, where are you going?" asked Lydia nervously. When the old man told her the address he was searching for, a chill ran down her spine. It was her house. I don't know where that is," she replied curtly as she pushed past the old man and ran down the alleyway. Glancing back, she could see him standing in the alley, watching her flee. Lydia was so freaked out by the incident that she didn't stop running until she got back to her house. Breathing a sigh of relief, she took out her keys. She looked up and down the street to make sure the old man hadn't followed her. It was empty. She turned the key, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. From the darkness inside her house, a hoarse voice said, "Tell me the way."
Hello. I'd like to tell you my story now. I was working as a driver for Uber about a year ago. As you might guess, doing that job resulted in meeting many strange people. Many drunk people, quiet people, loud people, and in a few rare cases, creepy people. This story does not involve a creepy person. It involves my one and only terrifying person. One evening around 11 p.m., I was getting tired. I had worked for several hours, and I had decided to pick up one more person and then call it a night and go home. This last person's pickup location was in a very bad, creepy neighborhood. I had dropped off another group of people here about a week before this night. I pulled up to the house set as the pickup location and immediately noticed it looked run down and vacant. It didn't look like somebody should or could be living in it. A man walked out of the house before I could even inform him on my phone that I had arrived. He looked normal, which was a huge relief. He got in the back and said hello and thanked me for picking him up. I asked where he needed to go, and he didn't give me the address like I'm used to. He instead told me to head down the street and make a right. I didn't think anything of this. After following his instructions, he told me to get on the freeway and go about 15 miles, and then get off on Lincoln Boulevard. I was happy to hear this, as it wasn't too far from where I lived, and this being my last ride for the night, I didn't want to drive a huge distance back to my house. After getting off on Lincoln, he told me to drive about 4 miles up and then make a right-hand turn. After he gave these directions, I started feeling a bit uneasy. After driving those 4 miles and making that right, he told me to make a left on Jefferson, a mile up the street. Upon hearing these instructions, I felt more nervous. He was giving me directions into my neighborhood. I followed instruction and made the left. I asked what next after this, and he didn't say anything for a few moments. I looked in the rearview mirror and my heart sank. He was staring at me with big, wide eyes. I repeated myself, and he finally replied with, "Go about another mile, and then make a left on Patterson." I can't tell you the level of fear I had reached after hearing that. That was the street that I lived on. Did this guy know where I lived? Was he directing me back to my house? My heart started to race. I made the left turn and then asked, "Next?" He responded immediately with, "Up the street here. My house is on the right." I felt sick. I kept driving and started to slow down a bit. I, without looking at it, passed my house slowly and said, "Which one?" He was silent. He responded in a very quiet and sinister voice, "You just passed it." I stopped the car, and my heart was now throbbing. I looked in the rearview mirror to see him smiling. I spoke. "Which one is it?" Still looking at him, he replied to me without breaking his gaze or his smile, 1905. I got out of the car immediately after hearing him say that. That was my address. I started backing up into the middle of the street. I took my phone from my pocket and called 911. He got out of the car on the opposite side of me. I backed up into my neighbor's bushes and made the choice to run and knock on their front door. I did, and after pounding for a moment, I turned around to see where he was, expecting to see him right behind me, but he was nowhere in sight. They answered the door, and I told them what just happened. A police officer showed up shortly after that, but the man was gone. Your guess is as good as mine how he knew where I lived. What my address was? I still have no idea. I didn't see him again. I never picked up another person after that. This happened about a month ago at the park near my house. I had taken my baby girl there in the afternoon. My baby loved the swings, so that was our first stop. While gently pushing my baby, a man walked into the park. There were other kids around and a few adults as well. I didn't feel threatened by this. The man wore blue jeans that looked quite old and a t-shirt with a bear on the front, or a wolf, I can't remember. He looked as if he had a mental disability of some kind, maybe autism? I wasn't sure. Anyway, he walked around the park looking at everything. The kids, the adults, the slides, everything. I went from feeling completely safe to completely unsafe when he spotted me and my baby girl. He started clapping his hands and laughing as if he was very happy to see us, and ran, and I mean literally ran over to us and stopped right outside the sand pit in which we and the swings were centered in. He laughed and smiled. He was staring at my baby. I said hello while forcing a smile. He ignored this and said, "Do you think she would let me hold her?" I responded with, "No, she doesn't like people too much." A complete lie. I took her out of the swing and said, "We'll be on our way now. Have fun." The man stomped his foot and let out a sound of frustration, like when you tell a 6-year-old they can't have an ice cream cone at the fair. We walked home, and the man did not follow. This was minor, as I am coming to realize, but I guess you had to be there. It was very unnerving, and I got the distinct feeling that this man was not well, and that he was dangerous. Who knows what he would have done if I actually let him hold my baby. I am a United States Postal Service employee, and this is by far the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. A coworker called in one day and said he couldn't make it to work for some reason. I was left with the responsibility of delivering all his mail on his route. I was not happy about this, because his route involved going through the old town of the big city that I lived in. This old town was a tourist attraction of sorts. It had very old, Western-style buildings, and the street was a dirt road. All of the buildings within this old town were shops, mainly for tourists. Most of these buildings required the mail carrier to actually go inside and hand-deliver the mail to the various shop owners, which took extra time and meant you had to converse with most of them, which I disliked doing for the most part. This one day, late in the afternoon, I entered a building and was met with only a staircase. It was not an option to not deliver the mail, so of course, I descended the staircase, which was an old, winding metal staircase. It was uncomfortably long, and finally when I reached the bottom, I saw only a very long hallway with old light bulbs flickering above me. Along the hallway were doors on both sides, very similar to what you'd see in the hallway of a hotel. I paused for a second, not knowing what to do at this point, where to deliver the mail. A second later, at the end of the hall, I saw a man walk out one of the doors on the left and immediately enter another room on the right. I didn't have a chance to speak to him before he was gone. After standing there for a few seconds, I decided to walk down the hall. When I finally reached the end, I knocked on the door the man walked into. Nothing happened, and he didn't open up. Just then, at the end of the hall, where I just came from, I saw the same man walk out of a door on the same side of the hall I was on. He walked into the middle of the hallway and stood there staring at me. I yelled out, I have some mail." He interrupted me by taking a long machete out from behind him. At first I thought this must be a joke, but when he started sprinting towards me, I decided it wasn't, and I entered the room I was at. The room was an old, dark wine cellar from the looks of it, and I immediately crawled underneath one of the old racks in which to store wine, and thought this can't really be happening. It was, and the man entered the room searching for me. He walked past me and continued down the rows of wine racks while sniffling. I got out from underneath the rack I was under when I felt he was far enough away, and I went back out into the hall. I sprinted back down over to the staircase, and just as I hit the first metal step, ascending, I heard somebody running fast down the hall behind me. I skipped steps, going as fast as possible up the old staircase until I reached the top. I bursted outside onto the dirt road and looked behind me. The man did not go through the door. I got into my service vehicle and sped the hell away from the old town. I later told my boss about this, and he said he would look into it, and I shouldn't worry about it. I told him I'd never go there again, and he did not argue with me. This happened on Halloween night. It happened years ago in the wine country of California. Myself and 2 roommates lived in a 3-bedroom, 2-story house. Early in the evening, everything was normal. We passed out candy to trick-or-treaters, hung out together, watched a scary movie, and overall we were having a great time. There's always a feeling of creepiness that comes with Halloween night, especially if you just stay at home. You never really think something sinister or something terrifying will happen. After all the candy was gone and all the kids disappeared, our movie was nearing its end. We had all drank some wine and were getting very sleepy around midnight. We decided to call it a night and go to our separate rooms to go to sleep. I slept in the bedroom on the first floor, while my 2 roommates had the 2 bedrooms upstairs. At about 1 a.m.,
I awoke to a noise, accompanied by a feeling, a very bad feeling. I got out of bed and stood in my dark bedroom listening for the noise that awoke me to continue. For a moment, I thought maybe there was no noise, and that maybe I had dreamed it and had gotten out of bed for no reason. It took a few moments, but then I heard a muffled scream coming from upstairs. I heard scuffling and commotion coming from up there. I was very scared and decided I had to go see what was happening. Although in a situation like this in reality, selfishness takes over, and you really just want to hide or escape and be safe. I opened my bedroom door and took 3 steps out of my room. The stairs were a few feet away from my bedroom, and just as I had taken those steps, I heard somebody coming down the hall at the top of the stairs, and they were coming fast. They were coming right towards me. It was pitch black, and having only a second to decide my next action, I quickly but silently moved to the back sliding glass door and slid it open. While doing this, I felt as if somebody was going to grab me from behind, but they did not. I tiptoed backwards into the bushes in my backyard while staring at the back door, expecting somebody to walk out at any moment and see me, but nobody did. So I waited about 3 minutes, I'd say. I was terrified of what had just happened in the house, what was still happening. I did not want to go back in. Then the faces of my 2 roommates popped into my head. I had recalled earlier that night drinking with them and having fun, and I realized if they were in trouble, I needed to be brave. I needed to go back inside to help them. So I did. I slowly walked back towards the back door, and I crept back inside, and I immediately heard screaming that sounded like it was being muffled by blood. I heard gurgling noises. My heart was beating out of my chest as I climbed the stairs, unsure if somebody was still in my house or if they had gone. I came to my first roommate's bedroom and turned on the light. A very surreal feeling of this cannot be happening swept over me as I gazed at both of my roommates lying on the bed. One was silent, one was groaning in pain. There was blood all over the room. I did not know what to do. One of them was making noises, and the other was very clearly dead. I stepped into the room and almost slipped on the actual puddle of blood that was there on the ground. I tried to speak, but I couldn't. I was in shock. I grabbed my roommate's phone off her nightstand and dialed 911. I felt as if the intruder was still in the house and was going to approach me from behind. I kept turning around. I saw nothing. I told the operator that I needed an ambulance immediately and that my friends were dying. Ambulances and police were at my house in only a few minutes. My friend that was groaning, she died before the police arrived, and I never saw the intruder. For some reason, he skipped my bedroom that night and instead went upstairs. Went upstairs to murder both of my friends.
This isn't my own encounter, but my mother's experience from when she was around 19 to 21 years old. My mother was almost a victim of a creepy rapist serial killer who preferably uses axes as a signature weapon. She lived alone in a small unit in Richmond, Melbourne, and worked night shifts at a restaurant. Because she worked nights, she would sleep during the day and wake up around 2 to 3 p.m. She had a friend who visited her place regularly around the time she woke up, and they would eat a meal together and hang out for a couple hours. This was a part of my mom's daily routine. One night, my mom was at the laundromat alone, and she noticed a smallish, young, European, or Middle Eastern macho-looking man unloading a washing machine full of baby clothes, like a huge amount of baby clothes. To my mom, the whole scene looked out of place. The guy didn't seem right. His demeanor didn't fit the load of baby clothing he was hauling into his basket. The man looked over at my mom, stared at her, but my mom mentioned that she didn't think much about it at the time. She left shortly after with her load and drove back to her unit. A couple of weeks later, my mom finished her shift at work and drove back to her place, went to bed, woke up the next day in the afternoon, and soon heard a knock at her front door. Assuming it was her friend, she started walking down the hallway where you could see a frosted window at the end. She saw a smallish figure, the exact size as her friend, and didn't have any thought that it could be someone other than who she expected. My mom said that when she was halfway down the hallway, her body suddenly stopped in its tracks, and an immediate overwhelming feeling of crippling fear came over her. She was frozen and staring at the shape of the figure outside for a minute when an unknown voice said something like, "Hey, come open the door, it's me." My mom slowly walked back down the hallway and into her bedroom. She waited in her room for the unknown visitor to leave, but he didn't. Every couple minutes he would say things like, "Come on, let me in. I know you're in there. Why don't you open the door?" According to my mom, she waited in her room for maybe 2 hours, listening to the stranger calling out to her. She couldn't call anyone because the phone was in her kitchen, and she didn't have the bravery to leave her room as the unit was tiny and easily accessible. She was afraid the person outside would hear her and find a way to get inside. She mentioned that after waiting for so long, she couldn't handle the cold temperature of her room as she was barely wearing anything. Note, she had only been sleeping beforehand. She finally got the guts to jump up and bolt from her room to the kitchen, which had a back door. She ran out the back door and down the street behind her unit. She had a neighbor who she was friends with and went straight to their place. She explained what happened, and they both looked out this person's window, which had a view of my mom's unit. Since their street was in a U shape, they could see the stranger still standing at the front of my mom's door. It was the same man from the laundromat a few weeks earlier. They called the police, but the man left before anyone came. After the incident, my mom stayed at her parents' house for a few days. Soon, she felt that she was safe to go live in her own unit again. A couple weeks after moving back to her unit, she begins receiving notes and letters under her door and on her front steps. According to my mom, the letters had strange things written on them. She never told me what exactly was written, but she mentioned that the sentences and words were extremely amateur, as if written by a 6-year-old. Letters were squiggly, written back to front, and arranged in strange sequences. My mom would give the notes into the police station. They weren't treated as much of a threat. This continued for maybe a few weeks or a month. One day, my mom woke up in the afternoon after a previous night shift. It was just another regular day, but she felt that she needed to go and spend a night at her parents' house. She left, spent the night, and got a call the next day to find that the strange man from the first incident had returned to her unit around the same time she left, made his way to the back of her unit with an axe, and immediately started axing down her back door like a madman. He was seen by a neighbor who called the police. However, the man left before the police came. Anyway, it turned out that the man's description, partnered with the strange notes my mom was receiving, fit the policeman's belief that the man was a suspect of the rape and murder of a number of girls in Melbourne from the 70s onwards. He wasn't caught, and I don't know if he ever was. He's most likely still out there. This story is 100% real. It is about an experience I had going on the deep web. For those of you who don't know, the deep web is pretty much the hidden internet. It isn't indexed by search engines, and you need special software to go on it. It is several thousand times bigger than the surface internet, which can be reached by Google or Yahoo, etc. It is also home to many illegal things. You can buy stolen guns, any drug you can imagine, stolen phones. You can even hire hitmen. Any illegal thing you can imagine is on the deep web. I never had a great childhood. My dad was gone all the time, and my mom was too. When she was home, it was normally verbal and physical abuse. I always needed to have a way to escape it all, whether it was playing video games, watching movies, or even drinking. One day, I was invited over to a friend's house for a sleepover. When I got there, he immediately told me he had something to show me. We went upstairs, and he showed me his laptop. He said he had got onto the deep web. We stayed up late that night, browsing through all the interesting things on it. He showed me how to use it, and I took some notes. The next day, I decided to try it out for myself. I downloaded the software, and I was good to go. When on the deep web, there is a page full of links. In order to go to sites, you keep clicking on the new links that pop up. At first, it was very boring. Tons of dead websites, or disgusting ones, filled with videos of real people being killed. Eventually, I found a forum. I can't remember what it was about, but I asked how to get to any interesting sites that were not illegal. One guy sent me a link and said it was a site that contained leaked government documents. I thought that was interesting, so I clicked on it. When I pulled up the page, I was pretty shocked. It was a bunch of videos of people being tortured, raped, murdered in the most horrible of ways. I have a pretty strong stomach, so I was ready to ignore it and just exit, but I realized that all the videos were playing at once. When I moved the mouse over one, there was no bar that let you pause or stop it. That's when it hit me. These were all thousands of live streams. I clicked on one that said, "Homeless man kidnapped in my basement." In it, a man was tied to a chair, covered in blood. To his left was a table, and on it was a whole bunch of tools like axes, knives, drills, hammers, etc. And there was a hooded man standing by it. On the right of the live stream, there was a chat box, and people were requesting the hooded man to do various things, like cut off the homeless man's hand, rip out his hair, and nasty things like that. Eventually, one man in the chat box said that he would pay several Bitcoin for the hooded man to gouge out the homeless man's eyes. The hooded man agreed and grabbed what looked like a fork off the table and began to walk over to the homeless man. I quickly closed the live stream, but I could still hear it. I tried to leave the site, but it was frozen, and I could only hear the horrible sounds coming from the stream. A few seconds later, the sounds stopped, and a chat box appeared in the center of my screen. I couldn't exit it out, but then, in the box, somebody typed in, "Hello,
How did you like the site? I paused for a moment, not sure if it was some kind of automated message, but then he typed again. Are you going to answer? I stayed frozen in place, but eventually typed in, who is this? The guy explained that he was the owner of this site and that he liked to greet first-time users whenever he could. I got a disgusted look on my face, and this is where things got really scary. In the chat box, the man typed, "It's rude to make faces, Jake." My eyes got wide, and I noticed my webcam was on when I always keep it off. Also, how did this man know my name? I covered up the webcam with a sticky note and typed, "How do you know my name? I'm calling the police." There was a brief pause, and then horrifyingly, a whole bunch of data was posted in the box. I looked at it and realized what it was. It was everything about me. My full name, email, address, my age. It even had all my parents' info as well. I panicked and shut off my computer, and I hoped that it would be the end of that. I did a complete wipe of all my computer's data and went to get a drink. I was under a lot of stress. That night, my mom said she wouldn't be home. She didn't say where she was, but at this point in my life, I didn't care. My dad, of course, was nowhere to be seen. I couldn't sleep, so I stayed up watching a movie. I ended up falling asleep on the couch. I don't know why, but at about 2:30 in the morning, I woke up. The TV was still on, and it gave off a dim light. But when I opened my eyes a little more, I almost screamed. There was a man standing just a few feet away from me with a mask on. I flew off the couch and darted for the door. I heard heavy footsteps coming after me. I flung open the door and ran outside screaming as loud as I could, trying to get someone's attention. I looked behind me and saw the man. He was running, and he was faster than me. I screamed louder and noticed I had tears running down my face. Then, a bag wrapped around my head, and I was pushed to the ground with such force that I felt blood in my mouth. I heard a car speed up beside me, and I was being dragged to the sound of it. They were taking me away, and probably I was going to be on that website. I had almost accepted my fate when the man with the mask screamed in pain and dropped me. I pulled the bag off my head and saw a van speed away, and then I saw my neighbor hitting the masked man with a baseball bat. The police arrived, took the masked man in, eventually caught the van, and shut down the site. My mom and I moved out, and I will never, ever go on the deep web again. This happened to me about 2 years ago when I was on a cross-country road trip with my good friend Kim. We started in the Northwest, and our final destination was in Georgia. We were trying to make this trip as quickly as possible, and since it was just the two of us, we took shifts, sleeping and driving. We had just passed through Laramie, Wyoming, where I got pulled over for speeding. Not much, only 10 miles over the speed limit. I apologized to the police officer, and he kindly let us off the hook since our car had no cruise control and we had a long way to go ahead. After leaving Laramie, we didn't stop for a long time, and the highway rarely cut through any towns. It was probably 3 or 4 in the morning, and the highway was deserted. Tall pines lined the 2-lane blacktop, and jagged mountains framed the starlit sky above. Kim was sleeping heavily, her chair reclined all the way down, a blanket thrown over her head. I had the radio on,
but she was so exhausted, she paid no attention to it. I was trying to concentrate on the road and the quiet music on the radio to stay awake. Visibility was very limited, and there were no lights on this road. Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed in my rearview mirror. I hastily looked at my speedometer, but I was diligently following the speed limit after the narrow escape from getting a ticket earlier. I pulled over, killed my engine, and rolled down my window. The cop car behind me appeared to be an unmarked vehicle, but it was hard to tell. Kim didn't stir as the police officer approached my window.
"Ma'am,"
he said in a Midwestern drawl,
"you know why I pulled you over today?"
"No, officer, I don't." His flashlight was pointed directly at my face, and I had to avert my eyes. I looked at the badge on his chest instead of his face.
"Your plates sure are from far away. Where are you headed?"
The police officer in Laramie had asked the same thing. "Georgia. Family emergency."
"Is that so? Well, miss, you aren't in any shape to make it to Georgia from Nebraska. No siree."
I frowned. Was my car breaking down? Tail lights out? In my tired haze, had I missed something vital? "I'm sorry, what's wrong?"
"Here, miss, step out of the car. I can show you."
He gestured with his flashlight, and the beam slanted across Kim's blanket-shrouded face. She yawned. "What's going on?" The police officer abruptly turned, walked away, and got into his car. He flipped a U-turn and sped off in the opposite direction down the highway. Kim and I stared at each other for a moment before I started the car, rolled up the window, and sped off, with no regard for the speed limit this time. While everyone was getting drunk and laid, I was at my parents' house, suburban home, studying for the MCATs. My parents spent their whole lives working high-paying jobs, and as a result, were able to afford a 3-story mansion and fill it with lavish Art Deco and furniture. Recently, my father decided to even buy a $15,000 grand piano just because it looked cool. I had moved out of state 5 years before and had to stay in this scarcely furnished guest room on the 3rd floor at the end of the hallway. It was 7 p.m. and the sun was beginning to set. My parents were attending the annual Rotary Club auction and soon headed out. I resorted back to my books and continued studying. I just finished reading the chapter about nucleus mitosis and glanced at the digital clock by the bed. It was 9 p.m. and it was pitch black outside and everywhere else in the house. I rolled my chair over to the door and glanced down the hallway. It was too dark to see anything. Realizing I had been studying for the past 6 hours, I decided to call it a night and collapsed on the bed. I looked at the clock and saw that it was only 10 p.m. My parents are probably home, I thought to myself. I fell asleep again. I was awoken soon after to another sound. This time, however, it was Mozart's Lacrimosa, playing from the grand piano downstairs. Is my dad seriously practicing right now? I thought. I had to admit, though, he was playing very well. I pulled the blanket over my head and tried to fall back asleep, but something was wrong. No one played piano in my family. My dad just bought the piano to piss my mom off. The piano continued to play. I had a sudden urge to go check downstairs and see what's going on, but realizing I was frozen with fear kept me from doing so. Instead, I reached for the home phone and called my dad's cell phone. He answered. "Hello? Dad? What's up?"
Where are you guys? We're on the ferry right now. The piano playing came to an abrupt stop. I remained silent. My heart was skipping beats. Ryan? My voice was shaking. Yeah, Dad? Who's on the other line? The piano stool screeched against the marble floor. Dad, there's someone in the house. I heard something heavy sprint up the stairs and down the hallway. I jumped off the bed and slammed the door to my room and pushed my body up against it. My dad's voice was yelling over the phone, demanding me to hang up and call the police. I felt something slam against the door from the outside, and I heard heavy breathing. After about 10 seconds, everything was silent. From the other side of the door, I heard a man's voice calmly say something that sent chills down my neck.
My wife was a doctor once. She never had time. She never had time for me.
The footsteps slowly walked away from my door, and I heard the front door shut. I was scared stiff and decided not to move from my spot against the door. It felt like hours before my parents and the police showed up. The police fully searched the house and discovered that the downstairs piano door had had its locks removed and were lying outside the door, severely rusted from years of exposure from the elements. The next day, I traded in my medical books and changed my major to civil engineering.
During my freshman and sophomore years of college, I was extremely awkward. I had just come out as gay. I didn't have any friends and I was just generally kind of a big wad of social anxiety. Given that I didn't have any social skills to make new friends, it's not surprising that I literally had no dating experience. Miraculously, over the course of the summer after sophomore year, I just sort of grew out of the worst of my awkwardness. I lost some weight, had a lot more confidence in myself, and my self-esteem was a lot higher. I came back to school in August, and by October I had a decent amount of genuine friends, and had gotten a lot more involved on campus. With my newfound confidence, I decided I'd finally download Grindr and see what it was like. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Grindr is a gay dating app that is primarily used for finding sex hookups. Despite my recent improvements on the social arena, I was still extremely naive and inexperienced when it came to dating and sex. I set up my Grindr profile with a nice picture of myself and a very brief bio. I got a lot of messages very quickly after my picture being approved. One guy who messaged me had a display name of Dad4Young, which should have been my first red flag, but I was oblivious. I should note that I also look really young for my age. At the time I was 21, but I was regularly asked by campus staff which middle school or high school I was visiting from. I'm 23 now, and I still get asked if I want the kids menu if I go to a restaurant with my parents. It's bad. So, Dad4Young sends me a message that just says, "What's up?" And I reply without looking at his profile first. I then look at his profile and notice that he's 54. His only profile text says, "The younger, the better." And his only picture was a zoomed-in blurry picture of his hairy chest. So I was not very much interested. But given my inexperience, I thought ignoring him would be horribly rude, so I kept replying. I don't really remember what we talked about in the first 10 messages we exchanged, but I do remember telling him that I was very cute. I know I told him that I was a student, but I never mentioned which college I went to. It's important to note that I went to a college in a major city, and there's also a bunch of different colleges all within a 5-mile radius of each other, and a few more within 10 miles of those. Sort of like Tinder, Grindr works based off your location, but much more precisely. If you're less than a mile or two away from someone who's online, it will display their feet in distance. I noticed that Dad 4 Young's profile said he was 25 miles away, which I thought was kind of far. He started getting more sexual in his chats and asked if I wanted to meet up. I felt bad flat out denying him since he'd been so polite. I told him I didn't want to meet up with him that day, but that we could keep chatting if he wanted. I figured that was that, and when I checked 20 minutes later it said he was offline. Nope. About 30 minutes later, I got another message from him. Hey, I got a wild hair, and thought I'd have a nice drive out to Canterbury campus. I had not told him the name of my college, nor had I told him the part of town I was in. I looked at his profile, and now it said he was 3 miles away. I started freaking out a little, and didn't reply to his message in hopes that he would just leave me alone. It's important to note that my college had a couple of different campus chunks separated by a few miles. I lived on the upperclassmen residential campus, which was around 2 miles from the main campus where all of the other student dorms and the main buildings were. I felt like if he were going to try and find me, he'd go to the main campus first, then maybe give up since not many outside people know about the separate residential campuses. 5 or 6 minutes later, I got another message saying something like, "No fun if you don't play along. What building on the residential campus are you in?" His profile now said that he was over 2,500 feet away, and every time I opened his profile, the distance would decrease. I was fully losing my shit at this point, since this guy had the ability to pinpoint my location, so I shut my blinds and turned off my lights and locked my windows. My roommate was also out of town, on some kind of retreat, so it was just me. The door was already locked, and I was getting worried. He kept sending me messages every minute or so saying things like, "I'm gonna find you. Here I come," and other supremely creepy shit like that. The distance was now just down to 310 feet, and I was completely losing my mind and didn't know what to do. So I just deleted my whole profile. Nothing else happened that night, though I was absolutely terrified he was going to come knocking at my door. Fast forward to 3 days later, I decide to re-download Grindr after doing more research and seeing that you can adjust the settings so that my exact location isn't visible. When I logged on for the first time to my remade profile, I adjusted some of the search filters until the results were specific enough to display Dad 4 Young's profile, which I promptly blocked. Later that evening, I get a message from someone with the display name, "We'll find you," with the same gross profile picture as Dad 4 Young, and my stomach sinks as he sends a flurry of messages. "You screwed up. Almost got caught by the police because of you. Couldn't find you, so I had to go to the other dorms and find someone else. He ended up calling the cops for me. I'm not giving up. I'm coming for that sweet virgin asshole." Freaked out, I blocked him again, deleted my profile again, and then deleted Grindr. I refused to re-download it or any dating apps for about a year after that, at which point I worked up the courage to try again and have not heard from this nutjob ever since. When my mother met and married my stepfather, I was 4 or 5 years old. He began to introduce me to the cult he belonged to almost immediately. I don't think my mother realized that he was in one, although he was trying to get her into it slowly. During evenings when my mother went out, or weekends, whenever he could get me alone, or school holidays, or times when he'd come and get me to take me out of school. He would work on teaching me how to be a member of the cult that he believed in. Whenever my mother wasn't around, there were training sessions and practice sessions for his cult. Eventually, there were times where he'd get me in the middle of the week from school and take me to a group camp sort of place that other members of his group set up for extended activities. Sometimes they would trade children for the getaway period, like swap us back and forth for cross-training. Once in a very great while, a kid there would die, but usually those were the kids that were just picked up and not legally part of their families, so they didn't have to make excuses for them missing. I was very lucky, because my stepdad didn't like to share me, so I was never cross-trained. My mother helped my stepfather in a lot of ways, not because she knew what he was doing and what was involved, but because she was naturally a hateful sort of person, who helped him in isolating and keeping me from making any long-term friends. She refused to let me watch television, listen to radio or music, or go to parties or any special events. It was a lot like being a Jehovah's Witness family, I believe, only she wasn't one. She just didn't want me around and did not want me to inconvenience her in any way, so the house was closed to me. I was restricted to my room for most of my life as a child by her, and that helped him, because it gave him a lot more access and control over me. My stepdad's cult was a sexual slavery group. They believed that women were naturally inferior and meant to be slaves. My training was to teach me how to be a slave, how to endure pain, how to pose for long periods of time, and essentially how to be furniture, and what he called preparations for my womanhood. By the time I was around 8 or 9, he was trying to get my mother into softer versions of what he was doing with me, with his buddies in his group. He was trying to get her to do swinging and wife swapping and stuff, but my mum was naturally a prude, who actually hated sex in the first place, which kind of made things worse on me, and made him more impatient. I then told a childhood friend some of the stuff he did, but not about the camps and about the poses and the training and the kids that were all expendable. She told her mother, who told my mother that I was being molested. There was a lot of screaming and shouting in the house, and the embarrassing interviews with her interrogating me, and being really angry at me. I was so scared, because of the threats that he'd made me, but also because she was furious that I minimalized what he was doing and kept it to just preparing me for womanhood. She separated him for 3 months, but it was too hard for her to make it on her own income, and she was too proud to ask for help and refused to go to any kind of assistance because she didn't want to be a welfare mum like all the wetbacks she hated. So she took me back to him and basically just gave me to him. I tried to tell her that he was going to start stuff up again. I was told that she was too tired to hear it right now, so I never got any help from her again. By the time I was around 11, I began to read books about child abuse, molestation, and cults. I couldn't find anything about sexual slavery, but there was enough already in there for me to understand that what he was doing was wrong, and that I had to fight it. I began to refuse him. Every day was a battle of screaming, shouting, throwing things, hitting each other, whilst my mother would then punish me for being disrespectful to my stepfather. In the end, he was trying to rape me in the afternoons, and I was stalking the house at night whilst he slept, with a knife in my hands, trying to get the nerve to kill them both in their sleep. Just as I was ready and prepared to do it, I had packed stuff and everything. He just disappeared. After a week of him being gone, my mother told me that he had been having an affair with another lady who was only 17 years old, but already had a 2-year-old daughter. And then she kicked him out for cheating on her. And that's how I got out of the cult. However, later on as an adult, I stupidly ended up with another guy who was into the same thing. He started out trying to pass it off as just an interest in normal bondage fetishes. But in the end, I found out that he was with the same group of people who were now apparently internationally spread out with private compounds and vacation places all over the map. It tore me up when I realized it. I called the police and changed the locks, and I found the boxes and photos of his private photo collection at the camps that he went to, with other men posing with women, tied up, cut up, unconscious, and beaten. So that was the second time I escaped from a kind of cult, and it's been 13 years now since I earned my freedom. I've never known what to make of this. The high school I went to was a very religious private school. In the senior year, it was a tradition for the entire senior class to go on a religious retreat up into this remote resort in the mountains with a few of the teachers. The point of the retreat was to grow closer to each other and to also find God and perhaps experience spirituality. But in any case, they took our phones and forbade us from using any form of internet or communication with the outside world. Then they would make us go through a series of soul-bearing exercises and speeches and whatnot. Honestly, pretty cheesy stuff, not that exciting. On the third day of the retreat, however, the entire grade is in the main hall doing an hour of silent prayer that was pretty much like meditation, but we were supposed to be communicating with God. All of a sudden, there's a huge crash, and everyone looks over to see a girl toppled over on the floor. As everyone stares, she starts writhing around on the ground and screaming, but not screaming like pain. The voice that she was screaming was a really strange, deep voice, and didn't sound like her at all. Someone yelled, "She's seizing!" I remember that because there was a girl in our class who was known to have epileptic seizures, and she would do it in assembly pretty frequently. But it wasn't the same girl. Then she stood up and started yelling in tongues. Her eyes were rolled up and her head kept twitching back and forth. She started to run around the room, yelling in an unintelligible gibberish language. And every now and then she would run at the cross in the middle of the room and then run back screaming and crying. At first, I honestly thought it was a dumb high school prank to freak everyone out. But if it was that, she took it way too far. The teachers tried to calm her down, but she just kept screaming in this weird language. She started pulling out some of her hair, and one of the teachers had to call an ambulance, but we knew that it would take them hours to arrive to get to this remote retreat. Another teacher tried to take her by the shoulders, and she dug her nails into his arms really hard and just kept screaming. It took several more minutes to calm her down. The teachers actually evacuated us from the room, and then she just went quiet. They took that girl away that night, though I don't know how or where they were kept because we were in the cafeteria after all of that. She never came back to school after the retreat was over. I wasn't friends with her friends, so I don't know if they knew what really happened. She was probably expelled for what happened, but maybe not. If it was a prank, it went on for way too long, but it was damn convincing if it was. She didn't seem like the kind of girl who would ever be up for anything like that, which is what strikes me as well. None of the teachers were allowed to talk about it when we asked afterwards. I just hope that she was okay afterwards. I used to date a guy called Norman back in high school. I'm 29 now and have a 9-year-old daughter. So this must have been at least 12 to 13 years ago roughly. I guess we were each other's first real love/relationship. And we even wore promise rings, which was a pretty big deal back then. We talked about getting married and what our life together would be like. Basically, things people say or do when they've been together for a year as teenagers. As things go, we began to argue and fell into a cycle of breaking up and getting back together. I was immature and stupid, and I ended up getting together with another guy during one of our breakup periods. It became a messy love triangle situation, and Norman and I finished for good after I chose this other guy. Not my proudest moment, but I was 17 and stupid. Fast forward a few years, I made a Facebook account, and out of curiosity one day, I looked up Norman. We added each other on Facebook, and I messaged him, apologizing for what had happened between us. I was happily married by the time, and had just had my daughter. Norman was a good sport about it, and we remained amicable friends via social media. I really only ever spoke to him to say happy birthday, or randomly comment on a status. Another few years go by, and Norman gets into a relationship with a woman called Marissa. I was happy to see him moving on. My marriage didn't work out, but I was happy with my life and raising my daughter by myself. During Christmas one year, I found an old Polaroid picture of Norman and I that we took during a cabin weekend that we had taken together whilst we were dating. I messaged him and recalled how much fun we'd had. He didn't reply, and this was before those scene stamps. I later found out that I was no longer on his friends list. A few months later, I got a message from Marissa. She basically said that I was a whore and a slut, and that she saw the message I had sent months ago. She told me to never ever contact him again, and that I needed to get over him. She went on to say how a charm bracelet he gave me was nothing compared to what he buys her, and that I was just a cheap shag he had during high school. She said the silver promise rings were bullshit, and that he had bought her a gorgeous golden engagement ring with several diamonds. Well then, I never responded. I got off Facebook not long after for a short period of time, before remaking an entirely new profile, and adding only close friends and family. Over the next few years, I would get ads from people who I didn't know on my social media. I knew it was her, because the first account that I mistakenly added began to send me abusive messages saying I was a loser and a slut and an attention-hungry whore who would never find true love. Afterwards, I never added anyone else I didn't know personally, so I don't know how she kept finding my other accounts. She tried to add me to Instagram, Twitter, and even somehow found out my phone number and tried to add me on WhatsApp. When Snapchat became a thing, I got an ad from a user who had one of my Facebook friends' names as their username and sent me snaps of whore and bitch in cursive handwriting on paper. I kept blocking her and maintaining no contact because honestly, there was nothing else I felt I could do. This year I joined a dating app. I met a guy within the first few weeks of being on it, who I thought was amazing. His name was Nate, and he had a fair few pictures of himself. He was average looking, so it didn't raise any red flags with me that this suspiciously model looking guy was trying to talk to me. He said he had an Android phone, so he couldn't FaceTime, but we would speak on the phone regularly. It was definitely a man's voice. We texted a lot over the next few weeks, and things seemed to be going well enough for a meetup. We scheduled a time and a place a week beforehand, and he asked me about past relationships. I didn't think too much of it when he asked me about my first real relationship. He seemed keen on details and asked me if I still had feelings for my ex. I reassured him that I didn't, but that I also didn't hate him, because I was the one who messed up and he was actually a really good guy. We talked a lot about that relationship, and then he said that he was really looking forward to meeting up with me. We had chosen to meet in an outdoor cafe, because I didn't like the idea of meeting someone at my house without me actually knowing who this person was. I was so excited. It was my first online date in a long time. So imagine my confusion when I saw a woman spot me and smile and started walking over. I was too shocked to say anything when she sat down, and yes, it was Marissa. She looked so smug and said, "Hey babe," and just kept on smiling and confessed that it had all been her. At that point, I honestly just wanted to know why. What did I ever do to this chick to get all these reactions from her, and for her to actually invest her time in doing all of this for me? Basically, this is what she told me. Almost 6 years ago now, when she and Norman got together, he told her all about me and our first relationship. She went onto his friends list and saw me there, and then went through all my pictures and posts, trying to see what he saw in me. Then when I messaged him, she confronted him over why I had any pictures of me and him still, and why he needed to have me on Facebook. So he deleted me and promised to never speak to me again. She told me that she hated me and said that I was a stupid bitch who loved playing with people's emotions, and that she wanted to give me a taste of it. She said that she made up accounts so that she could just keep an eye out on me and make sure she wasn't going to be in the same city as her and Norman. She would walk by places I'd say I'd like to go to make sure I wasn't meeting up with Norman in secret. She knew where I worked through my LinkedIn, and she said the guy who I spoke to on the phone as Nate was her friend who was in on it and wanted to see me go down. She said she had originally planned to make me fall in love with Nate and then cheat on me, but she couldn't stand to wait so long. The most disturbing part, however, was when she came to my daughter. The woman had actually become extremely fixated on her, and she was convinced that she shared some of Norman's features, and became obsessed, thinking that I had a kid with him who I'd kept secret. She told me not to even think about suddenly revealing it to him in some ploy to get him back, because she would be the only one to give him a baby. I was beyond horrified. It's not very exciting at all, but all I remember was getting up from the table and telling her to never contact me again. I got in my car and just sat there in silence for a bit. The first thing I did was call my daughter's school and alert the front desk of a possible situation where someone who was neither I nor her father would try and pick her up. I called my brother afterwards and told him what happened. He urged me to call the police. I did, but ended up getting the whole spiel about how if I didn't have any documented proof about her saying these things, they couldn't help me. It's been 2 months. I haven't heard anything from her, and my brother thinks that maybe she got what she wanted by asserting herself as Norman's one and only, and now she would leave me alone. Still, I have massive paranoia when it comes to what I post on social media and where she might be lurking next. I've told my family and close friends about the situation and warned them not to add any strange profiles or people that they do not know. I told my neighbors about the situation and showed them a picture of her so that they could call the police if they saw anyone like that around the house. I wouldn't put it past her to know my address and start peeping in our windows, or worse. When I was 15, I moved to Utah. It was a smaller town just north of Salt Lake City, and far enough west that the wind would carry the smell of the lake. and the air would reek of spoiled sea. I got dumped halfway into sophomore year, which was terrible for an awkward kid in a new place, because in Utah, they began high school with sophomore year, so I was effectively a freshman twice. The only luck I had was a girl I met named Sarah, and we started dating right at the end of this school year, so we were able to spend the majority of summer together. Now, you might not know this about the Mormons, and I certainly hadn't, but in their church they really like big families, something about spirits in heaven requiring bodies. So it wasn't uncommon for some of the more devout Mormon families to have 8, 9 or more kids. It really just meant outdoor freezers packed with hamburger helpers and houses with bigger kitchens. Sarah's family was pretty Mormon, and my family didn't practice much of any religion. So we just never discussed it. She had 6 sisters, 7 including herself, ranging from 6 years old to 18. I only met her mother once, and she was always pregnant. And I never spoke with her dad. I was a little too overwhelmed by meeting her family, and I avoided it. I probably would have figured it out by then, but I'd only lived in Utah for 6 months, and everything already seemed so weird to me. I remember a particular night I'd picked her up. She had a curfew that made it so that I had to park down the street so that she could sneak out. I wanted to jump over a small gully flanked by trees beside her house, but she refused, and we had to walk around, which meant passing her parents' window. I thought it was weird, but I just assumed she was worried that she might get her feet wet. It went like that for a couple of months. I would stop down the street, and I would wait while she walked beside the gully around her house, and up the street to meet me. Sometimes I'd meet her at the end of the road, but I was always careful not to walk too far onto the lawn, for fear I'd wake her parents. One night it was raining, and I didn't want her to walk alone through the dark in the rain, so I had planned on surprising her by meeting her by the back door through which she snuck out. To save time and avoid walking by the window, I walked over to the trees and saw the gully. The water was a bit higher and moving quicker than normal because of the rain runoff, but I figured that I could make the jump. Man, was I wrong. My feet landed in the mud on the other side, but I sank immediately in the wet earth and splashed hard into the muck. The rush of cold water was a shock, and I reached up and grabbed the storm drain. But what I had grabbed and dislodged flowed down with me. The water wasn't very deep, maybe 2 or 3 feet, so I stuck my shoes in it, still holding what turned out to be a black garbage bag. I dropped it and started to crawl up, and my hand landed on another black garbage bag. I tried to crawl up, but they kept dislodging this slick, viscous grime. It must have been the 3rd or 4th time I tried to find something to grip onto, when I accidentally tore one open. At first I thought it was a rotten orange, black and decaying amongst a spoiled nest of old bones. But I could just make it out. Yellowed skin bloated on white bone. It was a skull. A baby. I let out a shout. I didn't know what else to do. It smelled awful, and I was suddenly afraid to be near it. Quickly I scrambled up through the mud and kicked myself up against a tree, my heart racing. Sarah was there. She was crying. She'd been waiting for me by the street and came over when she heard me shout. She must have always known. I never saw her again, and all of the girls were pulled out of school. The local news report said that her father had decided he had enough kids and had been burying each newborn out by the gully. that they recovered 5 tiny bodies, all girls. I wonder if he had just been waiting for a son. When I was 14, my best friend and I decided to use a Ouija board. We got into a dark room in my house and lit some candles and started the game. Another friend of ours knocked on our door when we tried to contact the spirits. We let her in and resumed. This third person kept mocking us as we tried to get the supernatural messages, when all of a sudden she passed out. We thought she was joking, but then she opened her eyes and began speaking in a voice that wasn't her own. It was very deep and guttural and damn scary. But we still thought that she could just be playing with us. She then laughed, a really horrible laugh, and started to say things that had happened to me. Things that I had never told anyone before, and she did the same for my best friend. The candle started to flicker, and she began speaking gibberish. I couldn't even understand what was coming out of her mouth. We were absolutely terrified. This started off as a simple joke game, I thought, and then it got seriously out of hand. My friend then ran over to my neighbour's house. She was a very devout woman, and then she ran over to see our friend. She gasped and told us to bring her to her house. We grabbed onto her arm, and she fought us the whole way there, starting to scratch us and trying to get undressed. It was seriously freaking us out. When we got there, our neighbour locked herself in a room with the girl and told us to wait outside. I don't know what happened, but after a couple of hours, our friend and neighbour came out. She was very tired and didn't remember anything from the point that we were playing with the board. My neighbour told us to not play with what we cannot control. I'm not really sure what happened in that room, but I'm glad that my friend was okay. The bit that gets to me the most, though, is how she was saying all these things about me and my friend that she didn't know, that no one knew. It terrifies me to this day.